Imagine waking up covered in lice, your food crawling with roaches, and your bed a nest for scorpions. This wasn't a nightmare. It was daily life in ancient Egypt. Without soap or bug spray, Egyptians faced a never-ending war against killers like typhus-carrying lice and venomous stingers. How did they survive? Egyptians believed cats kept rodents at bay, and they recited spells to drive off snakes. Their methods ranged from desperate to downright bizarre. After this, even modern bug spray will feel like wizardry. And if you think visible pests were bad, just wait until you hear about the invisible horrors lurking in Nile water. 5 minutes into your day in ancient Egypt, and you'd already be scratching your head. Lice weren't some occasional nuisance. They were as much a part of life as sand and sunburn. Archaeologists still find nits clinging to the hair of mummies, proof that even pharaohs couldn't escape the constant itch. These lice weren't just the kind you pick up from sharing a hat. They set up camp and never left. Kids had it the worst. Some child mummies have been found with scalps so covered in lice eggs and scabs that their hair fossilized into a solid mat. Parents tried to comb them out with bone picks, but it was like bailing out the Nile with a cup. The more you scratched, the more you spread the lice to everyone around you. Families passed them around like unwanted heirlooms, and nobody was immune. But the real danger wasn't just the itching and embarrassment. These lice carried typhus, the same disease that ravaged armies and wiped out entire villages. When archaeologists opened certain tombs, they found skeletons with the faint traces of rash still visible, a red flag for typhus outbreaks that swept through the population. If you were poor and packed into a mud brick home with your family, you had no chance of escaping the cycle. It was a losing battle. So, what did Egyptians do about it? Desperation led to invention. They created one of the world's first lice repellents by smearing a daily mix of animal fat and crushed herbs onto their scalps. Modern scientists have tested some of these herbs, like neem and thyme, and found they really do repel lice. The fat suffocated the bugs, while the herbs kept new ones away. It wasn't exactly shampoo, but it was survival. The wealthy could afford to toss in a bit of frankincense, but everyone relied on some version of this greasy solution. Of course, when home remedies didn't cut it, magic stepped in. Some parents recited spells to Horus, begging him to drive away the insects as they greased their children's hair. Doctors even prescribed amulets made from dead lice, worn around the neck to ward off living ones. If that sounds strange, remember, they were out of options, and a little superstition was better than nothing when you were desperate for relief. Workers who handled the dead had their own routine. Embalmers shaved their entire bodies to try to avoid infestation, but lice still found ways in. Some mummy wrappings were layered with resin-soaked linen, meant to suffocate any bugs that managed to hitch a ride into the afterlife. Imagine being so tormented by lice that you worried about them following you to your tomb. The funny thing is, their greasy herb paste actually worked well enough to keep lice numbers down and prevent total disaster. It wasn't perfect. There were always a few bugs left behind, but it made the difference between constant torment and something you could live with. Modern lice treatments still use the same idea. Smother the bugs, dry out the eggs. Turns out, Egyptian moms figured out the basics thousands of years before science caught up. But lice were just the start. For Egyptians, the real nightmare began when the sun went down and something far more dangerous crawled out from the shadows. In ancient Egypt, scorpions were a nightly threat that could turn sleep into a deadly gamble. Their homes, built from sun-baked mud brick, were full of cracks and cool corners, perfect hiding places for anything looking to escape the heat. When the desert air cooled at night, scorpions hunted for warmth and often found it under blankets, right next to unsuspecting sleepers. There's a medical papyrus dating to around 1550 BCE that describes a child waking up screaming after a scorpion sting. The recommended treatment? Smear a paste of herbs and beer on the wound while chanting a spell for relief. If that didn't work, the text bluntly suggests waiting to see if the child makes it to sunrise. Some scorpion venom was strong enough to kill an adult in just a few hours. Children stood even less of a chance. Some wealthy Egyptians dunked their feet in water bowls at night, hoping scorpions wouldn't cross the barrier to reach the bed. But even that didn't guarantee safety. Scorpions could drop from the ceiling or slip through the smallest cracks. Fear of the deathstalker scorpion, whose venom attacks the nervous system and can stop a heart, shaped how people lived and slept. Egyptians didn't just rely on luck. They tried everything from magic to makeshift traps. Archaeologists have found clay models of scorpions with their tails snapped off, buried under beds or in doorways. The idea was simple. Break the tail on the model, and you break the power of the real scorpion. Sometimes these magical efforts actually had a practical effect. Modern studies suggest that scorpions avoid areas where dead scorpions are present, so homes with broken tail charms or jars of dead scorpions may have been less attractive to alive ones. Amulets and practical tricks often overlapped. People wore scorpion-shaped charms, tucked them into sandals, or buried them in corners of the house. Some families sprinkled crushed garlic around their sleeping mats since scorpions disliked the smell. Others let chickens roam indoors at night, hoping the birds would eat any scorpions that wandered in. Of course, this meant trading scorpion problems for chicken droppings, but for many, it was worth it. When someone did get stung, the first response was usually a paste made from beer and herbs, applied directly to the wound. Doctors or parents would chant a spell as they worked, not because they expected magic to cure the venom, but because sometimes belief in a remedy helped dull the pain. The placebo effect was real, especially when the alternative was panic. Ironically, Egyptians had access to cedar oil and lavender, two things scorpions actually hate. They used cedar in embalming and lavender in perfumes, but never quite made the connection to use them as pest repellents. Instead, most people stuck with garlic, spells, and whatever homegrown tricks they could manage, hoping to make it through the night without a sting. But if you managed to avoid the pests in your bed, you still weren't safe. The real surprise came with every meal, because in ancient Egypt, dinner often included more than just bread and beer. Breaking into an Egyptian grain silo was like walking into a living carpet of beetles, weevils, and roaches. Archaeologists have opened sealed jars at sites like Deir el Medina, labeled as premium wheat, and found over 1,200 insect fragments inside, just in one jar. And that wasn't a one-off. Similar contamination shows up everywhere they look. For ancient Egyptians, that was just breakfast. Everyone ate bugs, whether they wanted to or not. Flour ground from infested grain came pre-mixed with beetle parts. Bread baked in communal ovens sometimes trapped roaches right in the crust. Workers tried to hand sort the worst of the bugs out, but you'd still bite into weevils more often than you'd like. If you were rich, you might get flour sifted a little cleaner, but peasants ate whatever came out of the storage pits. There's even a medical text about a noblewoman who screamed when she found beetles in her mouth. The doctor's advice? Drink more wine and try to forget about it. Beer wasn't any safer. Fermentation vats were swarming with vinegar fly larvae. Bakers skimmed the larvae off the top, but plenty still ended up in the daily beer ration. Tomb paintings show brewers stirring vats while flies buzz everywhere. The alcohol killed some germs, but not the bugs, so every mug of beer came with a little extra protein, whether you liked it or not. Meat was another gamble. In the desert heat, it spoiled fast. Egyptians had a simple test. Toss a piece of meat to the stray cats lurking nearby. If the cats turned up their noses, the meat was too far gone. Desperate butchers sometimes rubbed herbs on rotting cuts to cover up the smell and sell it anyway. Nobody was fooled, but when food was scarce, you took your chances. The real problem wasn't just the gross-out factor. Parasites from infested grain and water likely killed more Egyptians than sword or spear. Dysentery from contaminated food swept through villages. Studies of mummies show about 40% had tapeworms from undercooked meat or dirty water. Roundworms from poorly stored grain could block up your insides. The wealthy paid grain inspectors to check for infestations, but most people just had to hope for the best. Smoke was the main defense. Workers fumigated grain silos with burning dung and herbs, hoping to kill bugs and their eggs. This made the grain taste smoky, but it was better than nothing. Some houses kept smoldering fires going in storage rooms. Housewives hung meat over smoky hearths to preserve it, making an early version of jerky. The trick was to keep the smoke high enough to matter without choking everyone inside. Cats were more than pets. They were pest control on 4 legs. Every granary kept cats to hunt rats and mice. Records show workers got bonuses for delivering dead rodents. Some cats even wore bells to scare pests. A good mouser could mean the difference between eating and starving when the Nile didn't flood. Baking bread was almost a defensive act. Hot ovens killed some parasites, but you still got weevil parts in your loaf. Some bakers added extra salt to keep bugs away, though that just made the bread taste worse. Wealthy families had slave girls sift flour for hours to remove insects. One poem even teases a rich woman for having soft hands because she never touched flour full of beetles. They learned a few tricks, like sealing grain jars with sand or hanging baskets from the ceiling to keep food away from rodents. But no matter what, everyone swallowed bugs. The rich just ate fewer. Medical texts list tonics for a belly full of crawling things, some of which worked, like wormwood, but most just made you sick. And yet, the worst invaders weren't crawling in your bread or swimming in your beer. The real threat was invisible, waiting in every cup of Nile water, ready to turn your body into its new home. Let's talk about the real horror show inside an Egyptian's body: parasites. Studies of Nile villages show around 70% of people were infected with bilharzia, a blood fluke that slips into the body through bare skin. It starts with a swim or a quick wash in the river and ends with worms living in your bladder or liver for years. Early symptoms are easy to ignore: a little fatigue, some blood in your urine. But after a while, things get ugly. The worms lay eggs that scar your organs, cause constant pain, and eventually lead to organ failure. Medical papyri mention patients passing clumps of worms, but nobody blamed the river. They pointed fingers at evil spirits or angry gods. Bilharzia wasn't the only unwanted guest. Drinking Nile water meant swallowing tapeworm eggs, which could hatch and grow up to 30 feet long inside your gut. These monsters stole nutrients, leaving their hosts weak and hungry no matter how much they ate. Roundworms were even more aggressive. They multiplied until they clogged intestines, sometimes killing children outright. Guinea worms took a different approach. After months hiding under your skin, they burst out through blistering sores, causing pain that lasted for weeks. Modern autopsies of mummies show that almost everyone, peasants and pharaohs alike, carried some kind of parasite. Even King Tut wasn't spared. His mummy tested positive for malaria and multiple worms. Egyptian doctors tried everything to fight back. One recipe called for swallowing crushed garlic mixed with donkey urine, a cure that probably did nothing except ruin your day. The Ebers Papyrus lists 18 different worm remedies, most involving herbs, honey, or sour milk. None of them worked very well. The only technique that actually helped was the slow removal of guinea worms by winding them around a stick, a method so old it's still used in parts of Africa today. For most infections, though, people just had to live with the pain and hope the worms didn't win. Some Egyptians took hygiene to an extreme. Priests and temple workers shaved their bodies daily, drank only filtered well water, and performed saltwater purges to cleanse their insides. They wore tightly woven linen to keep out biting insects. These rituals paid off. Mummies of priests show far fewer parasite scars than those of regular villagers. But for the average person, there was no escape. Children's skeletons show stunted growth from years of malnutrition. Wealthier mummies had fewer parasites thanks to better food and clean drinks, but nobody was completely safe. Parasites shaped Egyptian life in ways that still show up in the historical record. Doctors kept careful notes on worm symptoms and even started to classify different types. They stumbled on a few real cures, like using pomegranate rind, which modern science confirms kills some worms, but mostly relied on magic and hope. Surgical texts describe removing guinea worms in graphic detail, while temple walls are covered with images of demons shaped like worms, proof that people saw parasites as something supernatural. Villagers tried their own tricks. Some dug wells away from the river to avoid the worst of the contamination. Fishermen smeared their legs with thick mud as a barrier before wading in. Latrines over running water were a good idea in theory, but just sent the problem downstream. The rich stuck to beer and wine, which were boiled during brewing and safer to drink, even if nobody knew why. Cleanliness wasn't just a matter of pride, it was survival. Washing up, using salt, and keeping food covered were all desperate moves in the fight against invisible invaders. But even the most careful Egyptian couldn't keep out every pest. And while worms and flukes were bad, the next enemy was bigger, bolder, and impossible to ignore. Rats in ancient Egypt didn't just sneak around, they took over. Archaeologists digging at Amarna found rat bones nearly twice the size of the rodents you see today, some stretching as long as a man's forearm. These weren't shy city rats. They were bold, hungry, and smart enough to dodge most traps. Middle Kingdom farmers wrote frustrated letters to officials complaining about entire fields wiped out overnight. One such scroll reads, "The rats are without number in the granary. What the flood left, they took. For Egyptians, rats weren't just a nuisance, they were a disaster. Protecting grain became a daily battle. Rats chewed through mud brick walls and wooden barrels, tunneled under floors, and left gnaw marks on everything from temple offerings to coffin lids. Rich families sometimes built rat-proof chambers with stone floors and copper-lined doors, but most people couldn't afford that. Losing grain to rats meant real hunger, especially if the Nile floods failed and food was already scarce. Rats brought more than hunger. They spread fleas carrying typhus and possibly plague, triggering spikes in sudden village deaths. Archaeologists have found evidence of abrupt increases in burials that match the timing of flea-borne disease outbreaks. Villages near granaries suffered the most. Sometimes half a settlement could disappear in just a few weeks. People noticed grain handlers got sick more often, but nobody realized the real culprit was the fleas jumping from rats to humans. Cats became the Egyptians' best defense. At first, they were wild hunters drawn to the easy prey in granaries. Workers quickly saw their value and started leaving out fish heads and milk to keep them around. Granaries began tracking how many rats the cats killed, rewarding workers when their cats caught more. Over time, Egyptians selectively bred these cats for better hunting skills, turning them from wild animals into early house cats. The cats at big temples like Karnak became famous for clearing out rat nests that even dogs avoided. Records show that areas with lots of cats had fewer disease outbreaks, though people credited the goddess Bastet for their luck. Killing a cat was a serious crime, not because of superstition, but because losing a cat meant losing your best pest control. Farmers tried other tricks too. Some buried storage jars up to the neck so rats couldn't climb in. Others hung food baskets from the ceiling, though determined rats sometimes chewed through the ropes. The most reliable method was to keep several cats just hungry enough to hunt, but fed enough to stick around. Temple records even mention regular meals for cats to keep them loyal to the granaries. The fight against rats changed the way Egyptians built their homes and storage. Wealthier families started raising granaries on stone pillars with metal collars rats couldn't climb. Storehouses added narrow slits so cats could get in, but rats had a harder time. Some farms even dug shallow moats around their grain pits. Poorer families did what they could, making do with baskets and hooks. Oddly, the presence of rats and cats even shaped early Egyptian medicine. Doctors noticed that cat bites rarely got infected compared to other wounds, and they used herbs associated with cats to clean injuries. Some medical texts recommend a paste made from cat fur for burns, probably more for keeping dirt out than for any real healing power. The link between cats and health grew so strong that sick people often received cat-shaped amulets for protection. Cats' rise to sacred status was pure necessity. During famines, villages with active cat populations lost fewer children to starvation. Tomb paintings show cats leading rats away from sleeping children, a scene based on daily life, not just myth. Egyptians saw cats as protectors because they truly were. Still, even with all these tricks, Egyptians never managed to get rid of pests entirely. When rats and insects overran homes, they turned to another method, one that filled every room with thick, choking clouds and became the ancient world's closest thing to bug spray. Everyday pest control in ancient Egypt meant lighting fires inside your own home. The morning ritual was simple. Housewives carried smoldering pots from room to room, filling the air with thick smoke that forced out fleas, mosquitoes, and roaches. Archaeologists still find layers of charcoal residue in ancient houses, proof that this wasn't just a one-time fix, it was daily life. The smoke stung your eyes and made you cough, but it kept the worst bugs at bay. The recipe for these smoky clouds was basic and a little desperate. Dung cakes burned slowly and filled the house with a harsh smell. When they could, families tossed in handfuls of dried thyme or rosemary, hoping the strong herbal fumes would drive insects away. Sometimes citronella leaves turned up in the mix, a lucky accident since modern science shows citronella actually repels mosquitoes. Archaeologists have found smoke pots tucked under beds and in corners, often still holding traces of these plants. For the rich, smoke became a luxury. Elite families burned imported resins like frankincense and myrrh, which cost as much as silver in special fumigation rooms. These resins filled the air with a sweet, lingering scent that bugs hated. Some noble houses even had dedicated smoking rooms where servants kept fires going before bedtime. Letters from the period brag about homes free of creeping things thanks to daily fumigation, though it probably just pushed the pests to the neighbors. Doctors noticed that homes filled with smoke seemed to have fewer sick people. They didn't know why, but burning herbs like thyme and rosemary actually released compounds that kill bacteria. Medical texts from the time recommend burning juniper during epidemics, which modern tests show helps disinfect the air. Priests took this idea further, adding medicinal herbs to temple incense for purification rituals. It turns out their spiritual cleansing probably saved lives by killing germs and driving out bugs. Workplaces caught on too. Granaries hired workers just to keep slow fires burning under storage rooms. The heat and smoke killed insect eggs in the grain. Bakeries hung smoking pots over dough to keep flies away. Even scribes kept small incense burners on their desks, not for the smell, but to keep beetles from chewing up papyrus scrolls. The smoke wasn't perfect, but it was better than letting pests destroy your food and records. Of course, there was a price. Too much smoke led to real health problems. Children living in smoky homes often developed chronic bronchitis. Archaeological studies of skeletons from smoky houses show clear signs of lung damage. Letters from worried parents describe babies coughing through the night, desperate for fresh air. Workers in smoke-filled granaries ended up with red, irritated eyes and shortness of breath. The choice was simple: live with the bugs or live with the smoke. Smoke wasn't just practical, it became part of daily ritual. Before bed, families circled sleeping mats with smoke pots, sometimes chanting simple spells to drive out biters. Amulets from the period show bugs fleeing from flames, and some wealthy homes even hired specialists to blend custom herb mixtures for each season. Even with all this effort, smoke only reached so far. Some pests hid where the smoke couldn't follow, deep in the walls, under the floors, or in places no one wanted to linger. There was one spot in every Egyptian home that remained a danger zone, no matter how much smoke you used. And for anyone living back then, using the bathroom was far from safe. The ancient Egyptians had a name for one of their worst bathroom hazards: the private bite. Medical papyri mention it often enough that you know it wasn't rare. If you think your toilet is scary, imagine squatting over a brick-lined pit only to find out a snake has slithered up from below. The warm, damp environment of these toilet pits attracted frogs and rats, which in turn lured cobras and other snakes. During the Nile's annual floods in August, the problem got even worse. As the river rose, so did the water in the pits, sending snakes searching for higher ground, right under the spot where people sat. Temple records from Edfu show a spike in snakebite deaths every August, with some victims found collapsed over the toilet hole, caught off guard, and out of luck. Cobras love toilet pits for the easy prey. Medical texts don't mince words. One describes treating a cobra bite on the backside with garlic paste and prayers to the goddess Serket, ending with the advice, do not sit for 7 days. The problem was so common that doctors had a set of instructions for bathroom safety. They recommended whistling before you sat down, hoping the vibration would scare off any lurking snakes. Scattering crushed garlic around the hole was another tip. Garlic's strong smell actually does repel some reptiles. The wealthy had more options. In elite homes, toilets sometimes featured copper-lined chutes, too slick for snakes to climb. It worked, at least until the copper corroded or servants forgot to maintain it. Some noble houses even installed stone slabs with narrow openings to block larger snakes. One villa had a constant trickle of water running beneath the toilet to wash away any intruders. But this only worked when servants kept the water flowing. Not everyone could afford such defenses. Most people just hoped for the best or tried simple tricks. Farmers dropped burning coals down the hole before using the toilet, hoping the smoke and heat would drive out anything hiding inside. In poor neighborhoods, shared public latrines became notorious death traps. Workers at Deir el Medina built special snake toilets with high brick walls, but snakes still found a way in. Archaeologists have found amulets carved with toilet spells, including one from Thebes that shows a man squatting, surrounded by protective symbols. The inscription reads, "May no serpent rise to meet my rear." Some families kept chickens near the toilet area. The birds would eat small snakes and raise an alarm if a larger one showed up. For those who could afford it, mongooses became the bathroom bodyguards of choice. Quick and fearless, they patrolled toilet areas and could kill a snake before it struck. Tomb paintings even show mongooses lurking near bathroom alcoves, sometimes with little bells tied around their necks so you'd know a fight was on before you sat down. Despite all these efforts, nothing was foolproof. Snakes kept coming, especially during flood season, and every bathroom trip was a gamble. The truly rich avoided the risk altogether by using portable cedarwood toilet boxes with sand-filled pans that servants emptied right away. But for everyone else, the private bite was just another part of daily life. And as terrifying as snakes in the toilet were, they were nothing compared to what you couldn't see. The most dangerous killers in Egypt were so small you wouldn't even know they were there until it was too late. Malaria didn't care if you were a pharaoh or a farmer. At its worst, it infected up to a third of Egypt's population. DNA tests on mummies show the parasite left its mark on everyone, from royal children to laborers. The symptoms were brutal: violent fevers that could kill in days, chills so bad your teeth rattled, and exhaustion that never let up. Cemeteries from the worst malaria years are filled with small graves, rows of children who never had a chance. One nobleman wrote that he lost 4 children to the summer sickness in a single month, and doctors could only offer cold baths or wrap the sick in rotting meat, hoping to draw out the fever. Nothing worked. Mosquitoes were just one part of Egypt's invisible army of killers. Fleas and sandflies brought their own horrors. Fleas spread typhus, a disease that hit crowded villages especially hard. Workers digging royal tombs would suddenly fall ill with high fevers and rashes, and entire crews could be wiped out before anyone realized what was happening. Sandflies carried leishmaniasis, a parasite that ate away at the skin, leaving open sores that never healed. Some mummies still show the scars, and ancient caricature drawings mock faces with missing lips and noses. Medical texts mention both diseases but don't name the true culprits. Instead, they talk about demon winds and angry spirits. Doctors did what they could. They tried burning rat nests during outbreaks, which actually helped by killing infected fleas, even if they didn't know why. They handed out amulets filled with bat dirt or recommended willow bark tea for fevers, accidentally giving patients a dose of what we know now as aspirin. Some treatments were just desperate guesses, like wearing bundles of garlic or tying herbs around a child's neck. The real problem was that the killers were too small to see, and no one understood how they spread. Protection depended on what you could afford. The rich slept under linen nets, so tightly woven that even gnats couldn't get through. Poor families made do with coarse cloth or nothing at all, and sometimes just filled their homes with smoke, trading bug bites for coughing fits. Wealthy estates built towers with high windows for breezes and hung sweet-smelling herbs by the doors, hoping to keep insects at bay. None of it was foolproof. Mummies from every social class show the scars of mosquito-borne diseases. Cats were a line of defense, too. As you heard earlier, areas with more cats saw fewer epidemics, since the cats kept the rodent population down. But even the best mouser couldn't stop every insect from doing its worst. Most Egyptians just accepted sickness as part of life. Workers' records from Deir el-Medina show that losing half a labor crew to fever during flood season was routine. School exercises had kids calculate how much grain a family would need if 2 children died before harvest. Priests sold disease-proof amulets by the thousands, and some temples kept sacred cats for people to touch before traveling to bad air areas. The logic was simple. If you couldn't see your enemy, you might as well try anything. When science and home remedies failed, Egyptians turned to something else. They put their faith in magic, hoping that the right spell or amulet might keep the real monsters at bay. When it came to scorpions, Egyptians didn't just rely on brute force, they reached for magic. The most popular defense was the scorpion-proof amulet, a small clay charm with a hidden ingredient: ground up dead scorpions. The logic was simple: trap the spirit of a scorpion, and living ones would stay away. Modern researchers have tested this, and it turns out that some scorpion species avoid places that smell like dead scorpions. The amulet wasn't just superstition, it was early pest management, even if nobody understood the science. Herbal mixtures played a big role in these protective spells. One well-known ritual from the Book of the Dead called for smearing a paste of crushed lotus flowers and salt around doorways while reciting a specific chant. Lotus isn't just a pretty flower, its oils actually repel insects. The salt kept crawling things out, so while the spell aimed to keep away evil spirits, it doubled as a decent bug repellent. Another favorite was chrysanthemum. Priests recommended rubbing crushed chrysanthemum petals on the skin or bedding to ward off scorpions and lice. Chrysanthemum contains natural pyrethrins, the same active ingredient you'll find in many bug sprays today. Egyptians didn't know the chemistry, but trial and error taught them what worked. The line between medicine and magic blurred fast. Priests would chant to Serket, the scorpion goddess, as they sprinkled bitter herbs, often thyme or wormwood, along the baseboards of homes. Wealthy families paid for annual scorpion-proofing ceremonies, which involved burying charms under doorways and burning bundles of insect-repelling herbs. The rituals felt mystical, but the real protection came from the strong-smelling plants and the effort to keep pests out. Some of the most dramatic spells involved animal sacrifice. The one that stands out is the mouse under the crib ritual. To protect a child from scorpions, parents would kill a mouse, wrap it in linen, and place it under the bed. The idea was that the mouse's spirit would scare off scorpions seeking a warm spot. It sounds strange, but it shows how far people would go when faced with a real threat. There were plenty of failures, too. Some spells backfired, like the love charm that called for honey on doorways, which only attracted ants, or the fly-banishing ritual that required leaving out rotting meat, making the house even more appealing to pests. Not every magical solution was a win. Still, a surprising number of these ancient spells contained ingredients or methods that show up in modern pesticides and repellents. The Egyptians didn't invent pyrethrin bug spray or citronella candles, but they came close with what they had on hand. They combined magic, observation, and whatever herbs or animals were available, hoping for the best. What's clear is that pest control wasn't just a side project. It shaped the way Egyptians lived, built their homes, and even thought about the world around them. The battle with bugs, rats, and scorpions went far beyond daily discomfort. It left its mark on their rituals, their beliefs, and their entire civilization. Let's talk about the pests that shaped Egyptian history. Not just their daily lives, but the whole direction of their civilization. Cats are the best example. Egyptians didn't worship cats because they thought they were cute. They noticed that districts with more cats had fewer outbreaks of disease, and grain stores lasted longer. They didn't know about fleas or germ theory, but they saw that cats kept rats in check, and that meant fewer deaths and less hunger. So cats went from being useful hunters to being sacred. Killing a cat became a capital crime, and temples started mummifying cats by the thousands. Pest control turned into religion. Pests didn't just shape beliefs, they influenced the rise and fall of kingdoms. During the First Intermediate Period, when the Old Kingdom collapsed, medical texts suddenly started talking about plagues of insects. The Hyksos took over after years of crop failures, likely made worse by rats eating through grain stores. When workers at Deir el-Medina stopped construction, it wasn't always about pay. Sometimes it was because scorpions filled the dormitories. Archaeologists find more pest amulets in tombs from unstable eras, like people were reaching for magic when nothing else worked. The history books focus on wars and pharaohs, but it was often roaches, rats, and mosquitoes that tipped the balance. Cleanliness in Egypt was never just about looking good. Priests shaved every inch of their bodies to keep lice away during rituals. Everyone washed before entering a temple, not just for the gods, but to get rid of parasite eggs. Fresh linen wasn't about fashion. It was about keeping body lice in check. Even the famous Egyptian love of perfume started as a way to mask the smell of smoke and repel bugs. What we call hygiene was really a set of desperate moves to keep pests at bay. Their laws adapted to the threat. Killing a cat meant death, not because of superstition, but because losing cats could mean famine. Stealing grain carried harsher penalties than regular theft. Grain was survival, and pests were always waiting. Some contracts even included clauses about smoke systems or pest proofing, showing that pest prevention was baked into the rules of daily life. Modern pest control owes a lot to Egypt's trial and error. Take citronella candles. Egyptians burned similar plants around their homes 3,000 years ago. Our flea collars are just a high-tech version of the garlic necklaces Egyptian kids wore. Even the basic mousetrap, bait in a jar, shows up in tomb paintings. If you look at modern pest control devices, you'll find more than a few tricks borrowed straight from the Nile Valley. Sometimes their solutions worked for reasons they didn't understand. Dead scorpion in a jar amulets took advantage of natural scorpion behavior. Herbal pastes repelled bugs, even if the spells were just for comfort. The infamous donkey urine worm cure, it probably stunned a few parasites thanks to the ammonia. Egyptians spent centuries fighting pests, and the struggle changed their laws, their cities, and their religion. Their experiments, some brilliant, some bizarre, laid the groundwork for everything from bug spray to building codes. The war on pests never really ended. It just looks different now. And if you think you've got it rough when you spot an ant in your kitchen, remember, what you call a pest problem would have been an Egyptian's best day. Ancient Egyptians faced a world where invisible parasites in the Nile, rats in the grain, and scorpions under the sheets were just part of daily life. Their solutions, smoke, spells, and a lot of stubbornness, let them survive horrors we can barely imagine. We owe a lot to their hard-won tricks, even if we swap magic for science and bug spray. Which ancient pest cure shocked you the most? Drop your answer in the comments and let me know if you'd try any of these methods. Don't forget to subscribe for more dark history stories. There's always another hidden horror waiting. Egyptians would probably marvel at how easily we fight off an ant today.